It was a rainy evening when Sarah boarded the last bus home. The rain pelted against the windows in a relentless rhythm, casting blurry streaks across the darkened streets. She took a seat near the back, her wet coat clinging to her body. The bus was nearly empty, save for a few other passengers scattered throughout. The driver, an older man with graying hair and a tired expression, nodded at her as she climbed aboard. Sarah returned the gesture before settling into her seat, pulling out her phone to distract herself from the dreary weather. As the bus pulled away from the curb, Sarah noticed a strange smell. It was faint at first, a metallic tang that seemed to cling to the air. She wrinkled her nose but dismissed it, assuming it was just the dampness mixed with the old bus's lingering odors. The bus rattled and groaned as it made its way through the city. The rain showed no signs of letting up, and the streets were deserted. Sarah's eyes darted around the bus, noting the other passengers, a middle-aged woman knitting, a man in a suit reading a newspaper, and a teenager with headphones on, staring blankly out the window. As the bus passed under a flickering streetlight, Sarah caught sight of something strange in the reflection of the window. A shadow moved behind her, too close to be another passenger. She turned quickly, but there was nothing there, only the empty seats and the dim, flickering lights of the bus. She shook her head, trying to dispel the unease creeping up her spine. The bus continued its journey, the engine's growl almost soothing against the backdrop of rain. But that smell was growing stronger, more insistent. It was no longer just metallic, it was the unmistakable stench of decay. Sarah looked around again, her heart beginning to race. The other passengers seemed oblivious, their faces expressionless and eyes glazed over. She glanced towards the driver, but he kept his eyes firmly on the road, his face a mask of indifference. Feeling a rising sense of panic, Sarah stood up and moved towards the front of the bus, intending to ask the driver if he noticed the smell. As she passed by the man with the newspaper, she froze. The paper was dated from 10 years ago. The ink faded and yellowed. The man didn't seem to notice her, his eyes fixed on the ancient text. A cold sweat broke out on Sarah's forehead. She glanced at the woman knitting. Her hands moved mechanically, but her eyes were lifeless, staring into nothingness. The teenager with the headphones was equally unsettling. He wasn't listening to music, the headphones weren't plugged into anything. Desperately, Sarah rushed to the driver. "Excuse me, do you smell that?" "Something's not right," she stammered. The driver slowly turned his head towards her, his eyes hollow and devoid of life. His mouth stretched into a grotesque smile, revealing teeth that were black and rotting. "You're not supposed to be here," he whispered, his voice a raspy hiss. Sarah stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. The bus's interior seemed to warp and twist around her, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. She turned to the door, but it was locked tight. The window showed nothing but an endless expanse of darkness. She screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. The passengers turned to look at her, their eyes empty, faces twisted into macabre grins. The smell of decay was overpowering now, making her gag. With no other options, Sarah ran to the back of the bus, searching for an emergency exit. As she reached the rear door, it swung open on its own, revealing a void of pitch-black darkness. She hesitated, but the grotesque faces of the passengers closing in on her left her no choice. Taking a deep breath, Sarah jumped into the darkness. She fell for what felt like an eternity, the blackness enveloping her, suffocating her. Just as she thought she would be lost forever, she landed hard on a cold, damp surface. She looked around, disoriented. She was in a dark, narrow alley, the rain still pouring down. The bus was nowhere in sight. Gasping for breath, she stood up, her legs shaking. Sarah stumbled towards the main street, the neon lights of the city coming into view. She turned back once, but the alley was empty. No bus, no driver, no passengers. She never took the bus again.